You're listening to the Cancer Assist podcast, hosted by Dr. Bill Evans and brought to you by the Cancer Assistance Program. Wherever you are in your experience, we're here to provide help and hope as you navigate cancer prevention, treatment, and care. Help when you really need it.
Well, welcome to the Cancer Assist podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Bill Evans. Today we're going to be talking with Linda Papadopoulos, who's a vice president at Gallagher Insurance. She's a senior insurance advisor who we've asked to come and talk about insurance, specifically health insurance, but long-term and short-term and disability and other types of insurance. It's not something we've ever talked about on this podcast before, but we thought this was an important topic because I think a lot of individuals are under the illusion, certainly living in Canada, that all healthcare costs are covered. But just before we start our conversation with Linda, I'd like to just remind our listeners that the Cancer Assistance podcast is brought to you by the Cancer Assistance Program, which is based here in Hamilton, Ontario. Now, the Cancer Assistance Program provides a variety of free services to cancer patients, including free rides, equipment loans, nutritional and incontinence supplies, amongst a number of other supports for cancer patients. And these podcasts are made possible by generous donations from individuals in the Hamilton community, with the hope that by learning more about cancer and its causes and current best treatment approaches, as well as the supports, and insurance is a support, we need to know about these things so that if we face the challenge of dealing with cancer, we'll be a little better informed and maybe make that journey a little easier. So welcome, Linda, to the podcast. As I said in the intro, this is a new topic for us to address in a podcast, and maybe we've been derelict in our duties and not talking about it sooner, but it was raised with us, and I think for good reason. Many Canadians, until they're actually ill, don't have an appreciation of the importance of having health insurance. They may have got car insurance and home insurance and life insurance, but may not be aware of what's covered, not covered by our healthcare system. In the universal healthcare system in Canada, of course, what is covered are hospital visits and doctor visits and things that take place in the hospital, but things that take place outside of the hospital vary a bit across the country. And maybe that's a good jumping off point for us to talk a bit about that and your observations on maybe where people get surprised, the things that they find that they would have thought their insurance would cover, and you have to tell them, no, that isn't something that the publicly funded healthcare system pays for.
Yes. Well, thank you very much for this opportunity. This is new to me, too, the topic of cancer, relatively new. Although I've been in the insurance industry for almost 40 years, cancer was not a household name for me up until a few years ago. And coincidentally, through having two parents diagnosed with cancer, I started to navigate through the Ontario health system and realized, how important it was to be informed and to have the support services such as CAP that is sponsoring this podcast today. One thing I'd like to mention is that I'm a general insurance advisor / broker / risk manager, and certainly not a specialist in this area. However, I am surrounded by colleagues and support resources within my organization of AJ Gallagher Insurance and Risk Management. So if there are any specific questions that I can't answer or information that I don't have readily available, certainly be able to retrieve that for you. And it is important to understand that a diagnosis of cancer is certainly a shock to everyone. However, it may not necessarily be, the end all of our existence. There are opportunities and options available to deal with it, both from a rehabilitation standpoint and from supporting other family members. But to get on the topic of insurance, I do want to talk about the different lines of coverage and then how this is integrated within what we have available from our Ontario healthcare system and any other systems that may be available across the country in the U.S. and maybe even abroad. I've often been asked, how is automobile insurance affected if someone has cancer? And really, automobile insurance, if you as the individual with the cancer diagnosis still retain a valid driver's license, then your auto insurance is not affected in any way. It's if and when a doctor decides that it is unsafe for you as the patient to drive or to continue driving, at least until a treatment has been fully implemented and perhaps you're cancer-free or able to be monitored a little bit closer, you are okay to drive.
So important to recognize the most obvious things that doctors might be concerned about and take your license away, so to speak, as anything that's interfering with your cognitive function or places you at risk of having a seizure. But I think there's also an element of judgment. If you're, getting debilitated by your cancer and fatigued and you recognize you're just not as sharp as your doctor may not be in contact with you all that much, you should exercise some real judgment here, or maybe your family members need to exercise some judgment to say it's really not, they're not comfortable with you driving, and you should recognize that. And the loss of independence, I think, is what really upsets people. But gosh, you sure don't want to get into a serious accident when you're also fighting with cancer. So just a word of caution out there to people listening that insurance isn't going to protect you if you foolishly go out and drive when you're really under the effects of the treatment and the illness. So just take care. So that's an important issue for people to be aware of, and I'm glad you brought that up as a first issue because, whether it has an effect on your insurance. I suppose if you've had your license taken away and then you go and drive, your insurance is not going to cover you, right?
No, that's correct. That's correct. So it's very important to understand the implications. And also, if you do have a family member or someone else that you assign to drive on your behalf, that they as well are adequately qualified, licensed to drive. You don't want a 16-year-old with a temporary license. Those licenses,
yes,
I know. It's just
one of my grandchildren is just there with a 16-year-old license. So that's important to know.
The other coverage is homeowners or tenants insurance, and homeowners or tenants insurance covers your property, your home, your contents, and your personal liability. And sometimes, depending on a person's condition, there are renovations made in the home. Maybe an accessible washroom is put in, or staircases, or doorways, entranceways, and those can add up substantially with respect to cost. At the same time, they also add or increase the value of your home. So you should be aware that if you're making any sizable or significant expenditures in your home, that those expenditures, those costs are reflected or adequately protected under your total insured values. And that's just another thing to take into consideration.
It's an interesting little tip, and not one of the things I would have thought of, but when you mention it, it makes perfect sense, doesn't it? If you're making your home more accessible, in the future, someone else who may have similar needs will see your home preferentially over a home that doesn't have that kind of access, and it's increased the value of the home.
Definitely. Travel insurance, if I may speak about travel insurance, and that's another area that even for some of us that don't have a cancer diagnosis but maybe have other underlying medical conditions, always be aware of the fine print. If you're planning to travel, whether it's for 1 week or 2 weeks to a sunny destination or a different destination outside of province, look into travel insurance, but also look into what exclusions pertain to the different types of medical conditions or underlying medical conditions. Certainly someone who is undergoing therapy is it's a little bit more of a challenge to obtain travel insurance than someone that maybe has finished their therapy and is in a state of stability or remission for a prolonged period of time. The important thing is when you're booking or making any travel plans, to discuss the travel insurance with the appropriate person. And typically a telephone interview will be required, and to disclose, all the information that applies to your condition at the moment, because you don't want to be in a situation where you're in Florida or in the Caribbean and there's a relapse or there's an emergency and you realize that your travel insurance is null and void.
And that will certainly occur if you didn't disclose the condition. And I guess that's the well, people are probably tempted at times to not want to tell about having recently received some form of treatment. It wouldn't have to be for cancer. It could be for a lot of different things. But by not disclosing, if something does happen related to it, then you're not going to get coverage.
No.
And if you end up in the U.S. somewhere, commonly talk about Florida or snowbirds from this part of the country, the expense of care there can be quite shocking and really sets you back if you do need medical care in the United States, just because their healthcare system is quite different and it is expensive. So you want to be totally honest when you complete the insurance forms for travel and fully disclose. If you do have some conditions, it may cost you more, but you're better to have that coverage than take the risk, I guess.
That's correct. So to go to the main topic of discussion for today, which is, general health insurance. Like you said, when you're hospitalized and receiving treatment in hospital, our current OHIP or universal plan that we have here in the province does cover any type of treatment and medications, unless they're leading edge or they're brand new or something out of the norm that is available, but certainly not something that is regularly prescribed or carried out within the hospital environment. It's when you're at home and outside of the hospital environment, what costs are there that can be or should be or would be covered by insurance. One of the things we look at is if the individual that is the cancer patient is employed through an employer that carries some form of benefits or disability insurance, most likely there will be some coverage there for the individual. You don't disclose your condition unless you're making or filing a claim. For medications that are not covered under OHIP, for medications that or services, therapeutic services or equipment that you now have to rent or purchase and you want to be reimbursed for. So once you make the claim, that's when your disability insurer, through your employer, for those who are employed, will make that contact with you and request further information to assess the situation and your condition. I have not heard of an employer-sponsored program that cancels or refuses an employee who is on disability or eligible for benefits if there's a cancer diagnosis. There are situations where sometimes certain medications or drugs that are not generic may not be covered, and you may need to seek approval if you want to take those brand names medications. But for the most part, if you're employed and your employer does have a benefits or disability program, then you should be able to have most of your costs covered based on the plan that's in place by your employer. For those who are not covered by an employer-held plan, who are maybe self-employed or retired, the costs can be very, very high. And there are insurance plans available, and it really depends on the stage of the cancer, the stage of the patient's medical condition, and also, how much are you willing to pay as far as insurance. But there are options available. And these are considered high-risk options. So obviously with high-risk options, there's high-risk costs involved. The important thing to note is if you're in that situation, if you're over the age of 65, where most employee benefits plans expire or make a significant change in the scope of coverage, or if you've retired, then you really need to look at, or you're planning to retire, you should look at what options are available for you, especially if there's a family history of cancer. Which brings me to another topic, which is genetic testing. I've been asked by some people, and I even had the opportunity to do some genetic testing. I've kind of put it off for now, but certainly something in the back of my mind. I've been asked, if you undergo genetic testing, and there is a risk factor identified for cancer, do you need to identify that or disclose that information to your insurance carrier, whether you're applying for travel insurance, disability insurance, critical illness insurance, or through any employer-backed insurance program that's available to you? And the answer is no. In fact, it's illegal in Canada and in certain states of the United States to use any genetic testing results in the assessment of the individual's application for health insurance.
That's really good to know, because I'm sure a lot of people are hesitant, feeling that if they tested positive for some genetic change that predicted they had a higher risk for cancer, that they would have more difficulty getting insurance or have a much higher rate. So it's a protection for them to be treated equitably in the system. So that's a really important point to underscore. Maybe just to circle back a little bit, because we were talking a lot about cancer here, to clarify again just what things are covered typically in our system, and those things that would fall outside that might require you to pick it up out of pocket or through your insurance. So again, if you're in hospital, everything would be covered. If you're in
hospital in Ontario.
In Ontario. So we should make that. Or Canada. I think we can say we've got a Canada Health Act that does cover things in hospital and doctors' fees. There's been some changes, though, that have shifted a bit the potential burden of cancer care, because, I don't know, maybe a decade and a half ago, we started getting more oral medications. And so we've seen a sort of sea change away from just chemotherapy all intravenous in the hospital towards a lot more medications that are taken by mouth. So you can take them at home and you can go and fill them at the local pharmacy. Well, those, when you have them filled that way, may or may not be covered by the provincial insurance programs. And it's really interesting, the inequities we have in Canada, sad to say, because if you live in Manitoba or further west, all those provinces will cover all those oral cancer drugs. In Ontario and East, provinces will cover them if you're over 65 or on long-term disability, or there are mechanisms if you're on social assistance to have coverage. But if you're the unfortunate, 50-year-old man with prostate cancer who needs to take certain oral medications for your prostate cancer, you're in trouble. Those are expensive drugs, and the publicly funded healthcare system doesn't cover it. And I don't know how you plan for this in your life, because you don't know whether you're going to have prostate cancer or breast cancer earlier than 65 and might require these things. But it does underscore the need to be thinking about medical insurance, not just insurance for your car, your house, those things that we think of more commonly. And so how does one go about the process of dealing with this? You mentioned earlier, the company you work in has a spectrum of insurance advisors. So what would you advise people to go and have a conversation about medical insurance and what might be reasonable coverage if they're sort of not working in a business that's providing them health benefits? You're an entrepreneur and you have your own company. Should you be going and seeing someone about medical insurance in case you get cancer or have cardiac problems or other medical problems before the age of 65?
Yes, most definitely. In fact, I was approached, this is how I ended up in the insurance business when I was 21, by someone who was selling encyclopedias at the time, and some of your listeners may remember those encyclopedias. I'm kind of dating myself now. But also life insurance. The individual was also licensed to sell life insurance, and I looked at myself and I'm only 21. I'm healthy as a horse. Why would I even consider life insurance? And I wasn't employed at the time. I was looking for a job. I just graduated from university, looking for a job, And, I bought a $25,000 life insurance policy at the time. This was 40 years ago. And so start early, as a young professional. Certainly if you're going into a business or starting your own business, you're looking at insuring your business for its contents and for your assets. That's a good time to also have a conversation about life insurance, medical insurance. It can be very costly when you're self-employed, but it's a start, and it's a start to have those discussions. When we're younger, we feel invincible and we don't think it's going to happen to us. Just like me, cancer. Well, the cancer gene's not in my family. No one in my family has had cancer. And then lo and behold, within 5 years, both parents diagnosed with different kinds of cancers. So it can happen to the best of us. The important thing is to start early, whether it's when you're starting out in your career as a young professional or being employed or starting a family. Most of us tend to put things off, but once we get married or have a spouse or a partner and the children start coming, that's when we kind of think about, okay, what can happen to our family, to those people that rely on us, and how can I not be a financial burden to them? So it's important that we start early. Certainly, that's not to say if you have a medical condition that arises that there are no options. There are options, but it's much harder at that time and much more costlier to procure any type of insurance. So start early. Talk to the people that are selling you house insurance or car insurance. Most insurance advisors, brokers, especially if you're dealing with professional brokers, do have the resources and the connections to provide you with those contacts.
This is really excellent advice and an important message for everybody here. Particularly, I guess, a lot of people who may be listening who are caregivers to cancer patients because they probably haven't thought about some of these issues because they're younger, as you're saying, and you should be thinking about insurance at an earlier time. We're going to take a brief break and come back in a moment after hearing a message from the Cancer Assistance Program. We'll be right back.
We'd like to take a moment to thank our generous supporters, the Hutton Family Fund and Banco Creative Studio, who make the Cancer Assist podcast possible. The Cancer Assistance Program is as busy as ever, providing essential support to patients and their families. We remain committed to providing free services for patients in our community, including transportation and equipment loans, personal care and comfort items, parking, and practical education. These services are made possible by the generosity of our donors through one-time gifts, monthly donations, third-party fundraising, corporate sponsorships, and volunteer opportunities. Visit cancerassist.ca to see how you can make a difference in the lives of cancer patients and their families.
We're back talking about insurance with Linda Papadopoulos, a Vice President at Gallagher Insurance. And we've already heard some really important messages, and I'm hopeful that it's stimulating our listeners to think about their medical insurance needs. It's certainly been drawn to my attention that there are a lot of costs that can be incurred after a cancer diagnosis that are not covered by the public funded healthcare system. In a prior podcast, which listeners may want to go and find in our library at the Cancer Assistance Program, we talked to Dr. Chris Longo, who's a health economist at McMaster University, and he underscored how much the out-of-pocket costs have gone up. I think from 2003 to about 2019, they've gone up over 130%, and we're costing in excess of $2,000 a month, which I don't think most of us would anticipate. If we got sick, we'd have to be forking out $2,000 a month for various things that supported our cancer care. And these things can run the gamut of assistive devices, but medications that aren't covered, supportive care medications, pain medications, travel to and from the cancer center, parking, meals, lost income, cost to caregivers, and so on. You add it all up, it can be a pretty expensive proposition. Now, insurance isn't going to cover all of that, but there are certain things that insurance will cover, and I guess that's one of the things I'd like to have a better understanding of, and I hope our listeners too, what sort of things that the public system doesn't cover, but getting medical insurance would cover to reduce the burden on our families should we get sick with a cancer?
Yes. Well, firstly, with respect to medication, any medications that are prescribed outside of the hospital environment would be covered under a health insurance program. That's not to say that 100% are covered. Typically, there's an 80 or 90% copayment. In other words, the patient is responsible for 10 or 20%. It really all depends on the carrier. The other thing that's important with medications is most plans will cover, or all plans do cover, generic brand medications, but if there's a brand name medication, it may or may not be covered under the drug plan, the medical plan.
Or it may be placed on a higher tier, so to speak, so that your copay will be larger.
Right.
And this is very relevant for a lot of newer medications because the new medications are often what we call biologics. And as they've come out and then their patents have expired, then they've been so-called biosimilars. So a very similar, almost identical product is made, but it's much cheaper. And provincial funding programs really much prefer to pay for the less expensive biosimilars and are basically forcing the issue that direction. But if you were on the original product and you wanted to continue on it, you could still get it. But if your insurer has it on their formulary, then you would be paying at a higher copay for that particular agent, as I understand it.
And sometimes you may be asked to pay up front the total cost of the medication. And that could be a cash flow challenge for most waiting to be reimbursed for that cost.
You make a very good point there, because when we think of a lot of the new drugs for cancer are coming in with prices between $5,000 and $10,000 a month. So if you had to buy 3 months of medication up front, that's a huge hit that most people would really have difficulty absorbing.
Absolutely. The other part of coverage that private medical plan would provide protection for is therapeutic devices, as you said. For example, a colonoscopy patient will require ostomy supplies. Yeah. And again, depending on the carrier, there could be a copayment attributed to those. And ostomy supplies are expensive here in Canada.
Now, just curious, would all that stuff be in the fine print of the insurance contract?
Yes, so
spell it very specifically what supplies.
Yes,
and so
most plans will identify the scope of coverage. For example, prosthetic devices, wheelchairs, and any other apparatus or equipment. They do identify. You're usually provided with a menu of what's covered. And if there's also a cap or a limit on an annual basis, that will also be identified or described in the menu of coverage. In addition to having a copayment, in other words, being responsible for a certain percentage of the costs, you may only be eligible for a set amount per year. For example, up to $500 a year for massage therapy by a registered massage therapist. So there are prerequisites and requirements, and that's where it's important again to discuss the scope and extent of coverage with a financial advisor, with someone who is in the know, not just looking at the cost, but also looking at what's covered under these costs.
What you're getting out of it.
What you're getting, exactly.
And that also requires you to read the documents in detail, which I think most of us don't feel we have the time for. And then maybe it's too late when we need it to find out that wasn't covered in the text somewhere. Yeah. But that's an important thing to do, because obviously you can get wide coverage, but you have to pay for it. And I suppose most of us don't want to pay too much, so we accept some middle ground, or maybe we can't even afford the middle ground, but then you're not going to get as much coverage when you might need it. So
another important component to the coverage is support services, whether it's in-home care services by PSWs or other types of support people, including caregivers. So if a patient requires care in the home, and I know the we're trying as a society to keep everyone at home, comfortable at home. Studies have said that if you're convalescing at home, you're probably better and quicker to recover than being in a hospital environment.
Sure.
But there are costs associated with that. So medical programs do provide for that type of support where it's not provided or available to the patient through, a community assistance program or through the hospital or through OHIP. So if you need that extra care, if you need a couple of hours at night to help you get ready for bed or in the morning or meal preparations or housekeeping, these are some of the costs that sometimes we don't think about because we do them ourselves, but once we're sick, we have to hire someone to do them, and these are necessities of life. So those costs are also part of and can be part of a medical insurance private plan.
I guess I'm struggling in my mind a bit because people tend to put these kinds of things off because they see it as an expense and they're well at the moment. And you said, well, you should do these things early, but I imagine the vast majority of people don't. And then you get to be 50, 60, and maybe they start to become aware that, cancer is heart disease, pulmonary disease. Those things happen as you get older. And I guess maybe my risk is going up and maybe I should get protection. But then it just seems like there's a very wide menu of things that one might purchase through insurance. And I kind of like, how do people do that, and how do they sort it out and think through with an advisor
Right.
what's appropriate for them?
And you're right on. You don't know what you don't know.
Exactly.
Right? And that's where a good insurance broker and insurance advisor can sit down. This is their area of expertise, so they know what plans are available. And the important thing is to have those discussions. When I was 48, I fell and broke my leg. And unfortunately, I couldn't weight bear for 3 months. And, at that time, we had to put in a ramp. We had to get a special bed for myself. There were certain costs that I didn't even think about at the time. And luckily, I was employed, and I had a plan that I didn't even know would cover, a certain percentage of the ramp costs. 2 years later, when we decided to build a house, and it was a custom-built home, I talked to the builder and I said, I want wider hallways. Well, why do you want wider hallways? Because someday, if I'm ever in a wheelchair, I want to be able to move from one room to another. I want a washroom that has some degree of accessibility. I want you to put in a ramp on the side entrance. And I don't want stairs in my home. And so because I had been in the situation a couple years prior, I was made aware of, what could happen. But had I not been, I probably wouldn't have, even thought about, wider hallways than your typical building code standards, right? I mean, we're so highly inundated with information through the internet, through social media, that we ask the questions and have those discussions with professionals that are in the know and can guide us accordingly.
Well, I hope that's what this podcast is stimulating people to think about, because I rather imagine that the vast majority of people listening, and the vast majority of people generally, try to put off these sorts of thoughts and actions. And hopefully heightening awareness about these issues will stimulate a few people to go and find an advisor to talk about medical insurance, because there are really significant issues that can impact a family hugely. And it does depend a bit where you live in Canada or in the world, what kind of coverage you'll have. There are so many things about insurance I find kind of mysterious. I imagine that's the case for most people. Car insurance seems simple in comparison to medical insurance, but I guess you've said it a number of times, but having access to someone in the insurance industry who's specialized in the medical area and sitting down to have a conversation, particularly, as you said, early, especially relevant for people where there's predisposition in a family to certain illnesses. Cancer is common, or there's a genetic predisposition that may be known within the family as can occur with, say, types of breast cancer as an example, that is all the more relevant for those individuals to have those conversations early, but probably for all of us. Is that a reasonable summary?
Absolutely, absolutely. And we're living longer too, but we're not necessarily living better. So that also is, as an industry, as an insurance industry, we've tried to keep up with the times, and certainly the plans are much more comprehensive in the scope of coverage than they ever have been. But there's still restrictions and limitations of coverage, especially with respect to, what stage of cancer the individual is in, the age, whether they're employed or not, whether they're the main caregiver or not, whether you're planning to travel out of province or not, and whether that coverage out of province is for a shorter period of time once you're over a certain age or at a certain stage of cancer. So these are all very specific questions, but also very important to have the answers to, because they can be very costly to the individual. And only a professional that does this type of insurance day in, day out can give you that information, or can prompt you to have that discussion as well.
You mentioned living longer. I might say living longer with cancer too. And so many of our cancers now are being treated with therapy that goes on for years. It may be an oral medication for years, or one of these new immunotherapies that's given for 2 years. So, but producing better results, but having that therapy means more travel to the cancer center, more supportive care medications that are going to be out of pocket or out of insurance. So some of those costs are being amplified by the success of being able to treat cancer. So these things all interact in a rather complex way. And I have a sense that we're kind of scratching the surface in a way, but I think it's also been really helpful to have this conversation and put it out there for our listeners. If only it heightens awareness and gets people thinking about what they maybe need to be doing to ensure that if they do run into a catastrophic illness like cancer, that they have the kind of coverage that will allow them not to deplete the family resources because of medical things that are not covered through our publicly funded system.
The only thing I'd like to say is, podcasts like this are certainly very, very valuable to our communities. I encourage people to participate in and listen to these podcasts, but more importantly, to use the resources that are made available through these podcasts, especially through the Cancer Assistance Program that we have here in our community in Hamilton. It's been a lifesaver for me as a caregiver to 2 parents with serious cancer issues. There are support services available, but most importantly, it's knowing who to go to. And so the only thing I'd like to say is the resources are there, the supports are there. Ask the questions, do your homework, and find the right professionals to assist you and guide you through this process.
Well, Linda, that's a great concluding message. And so thank you for all your inputs to this. And as we close out the podcast today, also to remind listeners that we've done a lot of previous podcasts, about 50 of them are available at the Cancer Assistance Program's website, cancerassist.ca, Cancer Assist, all one word. They cover a wide range of topics, the supportive care services in our community. They talk to a lot of specialists from our community. We're really blessed in Hamilton to have great oncologists, hematologists, and other disciplines, and many of them we've talked to on our podcasts. So there's a lot of resources there, as Linda has just been saying. And Linda, again, just to underscore, you are VP at Gallagher Insurance, and thank you for your time and your wise comments today. I think they should be very helpful to our listeners. So thank you for joining us, and thank our listeners for listening. Until the next time.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Cancer Assist podcast. Find more episodes, resources, and information at cancerassist.ca, or follow the Cancer Assistance Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thanks for listening.